First and 10 for the Jets at the Cleveland 20. The Jets still without a turnover. Raymond McNeil breaks it, and he's going in. Raymond McNeil crosses the goal line, breaks the plane, and the Jets, the underdog, take a 19-10 lead. A 25-yard run following the interception. Snap and set down, kick on the way. It's up and good. And the Browns, with 7 seconds to play, rally back and tie the game, and we're going to go to overtime. Snap and set down, and the game is history. Cleveland wins it. And a celebration begins in Cleveland over one of the great victories in the storied history of the Browns. 23-20 in a second overtime period, the second longest game in NFL history.
We are just going over some of the moments in Jets history that led up to this season, and that was one that most football fans remember, one of the greatest games in NFL history. The divisional round playoff game between the Jets and it was January of 1987, the 1986 season in the Joe Walton era, which we are getting to right now. We left you in the end of the Walt Michaels era, where after the Jets lost the 1982 AFC Championship game, Walt Michaels was dismissed on the Jets' plane ride home. So thus we have the offensive coordinator by the name of Joe Walton taking over for Walt Michaels. Now, a lot of fans and teammates of the Jets liked Walton. They thought he was a pretty good offensive coordinator. Their offense had been pretty good under him, but they didn't expect the type of... Nobody knew what he would be like as a head coach. They knew he was a pretty good offensive mind, but as everyone knows, being a good offensive mind and being a good head coach are totally two different things. So going into the 1983 season, a lot of people actually picked the Jets to be a Super Bowl favorite because of how they ended the 82 season. They still had the sack exchange. They had Klecko. Richard Todd was coming off 2 good seasons. They had Freeman McNeil, one of the best running backs. They had a great wide receiver in Wesley Walker. They had Mickey Schuler, a great tight end, and they had a great defense. So going into the 83 season, a lot of people had picked the Jets to come out of the AFC and represent them in the Super Bowl. However, in their final season at Shea Stadium, which turned out to be a distraction in itself, as a lot of fans were disappointed that the Jets didn't stay there. They were inconsistent all season. They tried to make a late push to get to the playoffs. Then in a final game at Shea Stadium, they wound up losing to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And then I remember seeing just the destruction of the stadium by the fans that were there. I think part in anger and in part frustration. Anger that the Jets were leaving, frustration at the season they had. So the Jets finished 7-9 in 1983. Then in 84, their first season in the Meadowlands, they again inconsistent. Richard Todd was at the top of that inconsistency. There always seemed to be something that would go wrong at the end of games, especially that caused the Jets to lose and to not be as consistent as they should have been, and that their talent would lead you to think that they could be. So in '84, again, they finished 7-9, and then big questions wonder for the '85 season. As you started to see in '84 a change at quarterback, where Richard Todd was out. They had Pat Ryan, who was a Jet backup seemingly forever in the 80s. And then they drafted Ken O'Brien in 1983, the great quarterback draft of 1983, when everyone knows how that went and the guys that were drafted. The Jets for a long time took a lot of heat because they drafted Ken O'Brien out of little-known Cal Davis instead of drafting Dan Marino, and everyone knows that Dan Marino wound up having a Hall of Fame career. So O'Brien starts in '84. He's not bad. I think a lot of people saw hope in him, and he had some talent. Then the '85 season starts, and O'Brien really takes off, and he has a really great season, leading the Jets to an 11-5 season and a wild card berth where they get to host a playoff game. But just like 1981, the Jets were unable to use that advantage. And thanks in part to O'Brien being knocked out of the game with a concussion, the Jets lost 26-14 to the eventual AFC champion New England Patriots. Now, when they lost that game, no one imagined the run the Patriots would go on and actually going to the Super Bowl and representing the AFC, because the Jets and Patriots were really even. And then you thought, okay, well, maybe the Jets really didn't lose to a bad team. No one knew how good the Patriots were going to turn out to be that year. But O'Brien himself, getting back to him, he was the league's leading passer in 1985. So you figure the Jets finally have what they haven't had for a long time. They had under Todd, he showed flashes, and definitely in the 81 and 82 season, you saw signs of him becoming a franchise quarterback, but he never did. So under Ken O'Brien, they finally thought they had a quarterback that could maybe rival what Joe Namath gave them for a couple years, which a guy who could lead the team, who was going to represent New York and be like the focal point of the Jets. So you have O'Brien, the league's leading passer in 85. A lot of people were looking forward to the 86 season, where again, like in 83, a lot of pundits picked the Jets to be the team to beat in the AFC. Again, you got to remember, in 85, they finished 11-5. Their defense was led by Bud Carson, who was the defensive coordinator of the great Steelers teams in the 70s. He was the defensive coordinator. And the Jets actually had one of the best defenses in the league in 1985. They had one of the lowest as far as points allowed. They were one of the teams that allowed the fewest points in the league in 1985. So the 86 season starts, and a lot of people were, again, really excited for the Jets. And this was maybe the year that they were going to put it all together. And that's definitely the way it started out. The first 11 games of the 1986 season, the Jets were dominant. They were 10-1, and Ken O'Brien was awesome. O'Brien had 23 touchdowns to 8 interceptions. He had a quarterback rating of 107.9. He had a 66% completion percentage, and he was averaging 8.8 yards per attempt. And then the Jets, I remember at one point they went up to Seattle, and to give you an idea of how good Seattle was, the New York Giants, who eventually went on to win the Super Bowl in 1986, had 2 losses, and one of them was at Seattle. Well, the Jets went up to Seattle in 1986 and beat them 38-7. They just dominated them. And that was, I remember watching that game and thinking, wow, the Jets really are for real this year. So they start off 10-1. You think that they're on their way to not only winning the division, but possibly getting home field advantage in the AFC, as they had the league's best record. However, that didn't last long, as they wind up at the end of that 10-1 stretch. They suffered just a lot of injuries. Joe Klecko got injured, Mark Gastineau got injured, Marty Lyons was injured. They had some injuries on offense with Fear McNeil, but no one thought they would stumble like they wound up doing. So, starting with a Monday Night Football game in Miami, the Jets had a very public humiliation in a 45-3 loss to the Dolphins, where the Dolphins seemingly, they took pride and they revied in the. I don't know if that was. I don't even know if that's a word, revy, but they really they put the quash on the Jets. I mean, they really let them have it, and they were going to take advantage of this their moment. The Dolphins struggled in '86, but that Monday night they celebrated. They really stuck it to the Jets and wound up beating them 45-3. Game was over pretty much before it began, and that triggered just a complete meltdown as far as the Jets were concerned. They wound up losing the last 5 games of that season, where they just defensively they totally fell apart. Over the last 5 games of that season, I'll give you an idea how bad the defense was. They allowed 36.6 points per game for those 5 games. But the thing that really confused a lot of Jet fans is it wasn't just their defense. We had kind of figured that they were going to struggle a little bit when you consider the injuries they had. Joe Klecko was injured, Gastineau got injured for a stretch, Lance Moe was injured. Just a lot of the Jets' impact players on defense were injured for that period. But offensively, they really fell off the boat as well, as O'Brien, who was so great the first 11 games of the season, was just as bad the last 5 games of the season. So we already said he had a 23-8 TD interception ratio the first 11 games. The last 5 games, he threw 2 touchdowns and 12 interceptions. His quarterback rating, which had been 107.9 the first 11 games, fell to 45. His completion percentage, which was 66.5 in his first 11 games, fell to 54.4. And his yards per attempt, which was 8.8 his first 11 games, fell to 5.6. Now, it actually got so bad for O'Brien that after the Jets lost the last 5 games of the year, they still managed to make the playoffs, though. The way tiebreakers broke, the Jets were one of a couple teams to have a 10-6 record, and they won the tiebreaker that gave them actually hosted a wild card game, if you can believe it, as well. So it got so bad for O'Brien that the Jets benched him in the wild card game, and he didn't play. They went with backup Pat Ryan, and remarkably, the Jets dominated the Chiefs in that game. They wound up winning 35-15, advancing to the divisional round against the number 1 seed Cleveland Browns, which is where you heard the highlights at the top of this for that game, where the Jets, they were undermanned all game. Not only did that happen, were they already dealing with injuries, but Pat Ryan, who played so well in the wild card game, got hurt early in the divisional game after connecting with Wesley Walker on a long flea flicker play for a touchdown. Ryan got injured and he's out. So O'Brien came back in, and you could just see O'Brien wasn't the same. He was completely shell-shocked. Was not the same quarterback that he was early on. But the Jets still managed to fight. That thanks to a couple of Bernie Kosar mistakes, the Jets actually, after that Freeman McNeil run, had a 20-10 lead with 4 minutes left. But then, as you heard, also the defense was not able to hold it. They kept shooting themselves in the foot with mistakes and penalties. And the real turning point was after they had took a 10-point lead, the Browns had gotten the ball back, and Mark Gastineau was called for a late hit on what would have been a 3rd and 24. The late hit actually gave the Browns a first down. So instead of 3rd and 24, and the Browns trying to get 24 yards for a first down in 2 plays, which then would have really ended the game, the Browns got 1st and 10. They eventually ran down. They scored a touchdown right after the 2-minute warning to cut the lead to 3. Then after the Jets again shot themselves in the foot with the ball and not being able to pin the Browns back deep in their territory, the Browns wound up driving down and tying the game with a field goal and then winning it in overtime. So as one of the most, I think, painful memories for Jet fans in playoff history, that game was a game where you thought it was over. You thought the Jets were going to be in the championship game. And at one point, Charlie Steiner, the radio guy for the Jets, even said on a broadcast, the Jets are going to Denver, and it didn't work out. So I think a lot of that sticks in a lot of fans' memories as like typical of the Joe Walton era and the Jets not being able to finish. So after that game, that was kind of the unofficial end of the Joe Walton era, as he managed to stay around for a couple more seasons, but he wound up being fired at the end of the 1989 season after finishing the final years of his tenure after the 86 season. Walton was 18-27-1 in his final 3 seasons. When we come back, we will enter Bruce Coslett era here on Hit the Mark.